Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Sharing Data and Insights for More Engaging Local Journalism. My name is Troy Thibodeau. I lead the data journalism team at the Associated Press, and with me today is Megan Hoyer, data editor at the Associated Press, and James Gray, who is with Data.World. So to get started, let me just ask, how many of you are doing local journalism? Nice. How many of you are doing data journalism? How many of you are able to do all the data stories you wish you could do? So one of the things about data journalism that we found out very quickly as we start to do it, it's important. We know it's important. We know the kinds of benefits we get from having data for our stories, the harder edge we can have for a story, the benefits for credibility and transparency, but it doesn't scale very well, right? Why doesn't it scale? There are a few things that make data journalism expensive. You've got a very specialized skill set, so not everyone can do it. You can't get as many hands as you need maybe on the project. And then you've got what I like to call the inglorious 80%. Every project that you're going to do, 80% of your time is going to be spent doing something that's not really pretty to look at. You're going to be finding the data, finding the problems in the data, going back to the agency and talking to them about the problems and trying to figure out how to fix those problems in the data. And then finally, after you've gone through all the slog of trying to clean the data and make sense of it, then you can actually get to the fun part and figure out if there's a story there or not. So that commitment up front, that 80%, is what makes it so hard to do the number of stories that you want to do. So one of the things that we've been sort of asking ourselves at AP, especially in thinking about our membership and how we're working with smaller news organizations, is how can we start to scale data journalism? How can we make it easier to do more of this work that we all want to do? And so we thought a bit about how do we develop tools, or how do we think about the tools that we use? We think about reusability. So if we have code that's reusable, right? So we can apply the same code to different data sets. Or when the same data set comes through again, we're able to reapply that code to it. And we also thought about collaboration. And collaboration is kind of at the core of what we do at the AP, right? It's who we are. It's in our DNA. It's the reason we were formed is so that news organizations could do more together than they could do by themselves. So we thought about that's kind of what we do. It's kind of who we are. How do we do more of that? And so about, I'd say 4 years ago now, 3.5 years ago, we started a program where whenever we do a big national data-driven story, and that data set is granular enough that there's a local component to it. So if I can drill down to a county level, or I can drill down to a municipality level, we said, well, why don't we give this data away? Why don't we help our members use this data to tell their own stories? So they know that there's going to be an AP story, so they know there's going to be kind of some buzz around this topic, right? And they can see what we're writing, we'll advance the story, and we'll give them the data, and we'll find a way to document that data and walk them through how to use it with some ideas for localization. And so essentially, we have to do this slog of the inglorious 80% anyway. For every one of these stories, we're going to have to do it. And at most, we're getting like one national story and maybe a couple of state stories. But with the distributed data program, now we're starting to completely multiply our effect. The power of what we do at Data Journalism in the AP, our team of 10 is now multiplied 1,000-fold. Because all of our members and all the journalists there can look at that and say, here's this national story, here's the data set, here's some ideas for localization. Let's see how this applies for my audience. Let's see how I can find the story that's most relevant to my readers. And we've had some really, really good results from that. And so we want to do more. We want to build on that. And so when we started, we were doing some very basic delivery methods. Basic is extremely primitive. S3 simple sites that didn't really do anything. We just kind of stuck the data up there and said, hey, have at it. And it wasn't really easy to use, and it wasn't really pretty to look at. And we thought, we need to do better than that. And so about a year ago, we started a collaboration with Data.World. And James is going to tell you more about Data.World. But we started working with Data.World as our means of distribution. So we've got a pilot program going with them. And Megan will tell you more about that as well. About how to work with our data using Data.World. So I'll turn it over to James now.
Yeah, thanks, Troy. And for a bit of context around who Data.World is and why we exist, so we are a public benefit corporation and a B Corp, and around half what we do is towards this mission of basically advancing the state of linked and open data. So a lot of people on our site use this to advance open data projects and kind of share data they've found they want to share around the world. The other half, though, more broadly, is addressing this kind of problem of data silos. And as people who work in data journalism, I'm sure you're very familiar with this fact that most data that you want tends to live in walled gardens. It's difficult to find, much less access and see where the areas of correlation may lie. And so a lot of what we've been trying to build out is, how do we make data more collaborative and let people basically work on the same data sets, but also kind of to Troy's point, once some of the initial work on that data has been done, make sure it's not unnecessarily reproduced again, and you can leverage that existing work and really build off of it in interesting ways. So what they've been doing, the Associated Press, is a really phenomenal use case of making sure that you have these data science experts meeting maybe some of the subject matter experts where they are, and leveraging the strengths of both groups in a really smart way. So that's a lot we've been focusing on this last year, and at least for the rest of the journalism community, we're really excited to see both how they've been distributing data, but also how more data journalists can kind of increase their skill set in terms of finding stories within data sets themselves.
So we wanted to show you a couple of examples of what we've done. So I was a data reporter at a Metro paper for a long time. I kind of know exactly what a lot of local Metro papers are dealing with. There's a million stories you want to do. Some of them are local. A lot of them are kind of national in scope. It's really hard to find the time to do everything. So our whole mission is to help you guys handle more. If we can handle some of the national stories and feed you clean data to tell the stories in your community, then you can spend your time doing a story that is intensely local and that only you can tell. Our whole hope is to kind of make your lives easier, basically. So we do this about 20 to 25 times a year. We distribute data. All of our members who are kind of enrolled in this program get an email saying, hey, the AP has put a new data set on data.world. In many cases, we host a webinar where either myself or another data analyst will be on the webinar and kind of walk you through exactly what the data means. We'll also have the reporter from the AP who did a lot of the reporting and saying, oh, here's what experts have told me, here's kind of what you need to look out for. So we kind of explain to you exactly how to use the data. Sometimes we have gone as far as to give people example sentences. Here's something you should drop into your story. Because people tend to use our data in 3 different ways. There are places that do their entire own stories based on their data. If we are writing about a trend like the spring home ownership market, and it's a huge deal in your neighborhood, or in your area, there's not a lot of inventory, people are having a hard time finding houses to buy, housing prices are going up a lot, that might be a local story that you want to tell. Just take our data and write your own thing with your own byline and go for it. Awesome. But there's also kind of a couple of other use cases. A lot of people have used our data just to power interactives that run alongside the national AP story. Take our data, build maps, build lookup tools, so people in your area can see exactly, oh, here's the national story, but here's how it's looking in our area. And then the third thing is people do with our data is just literally drop 2 paragraphs, look up what the thing is in their area, here's how many places tested for lead, and we're over the national limit. When lead was in water last year, we released a data set of all of the lead testing across the country and every water system in the country. And we gave that data out to people so they could just look up how many places failed in their area. So 5 places failed in our metro region. And here's the list of them. And then you drop 3 graphs into the national story, and your readers have a much better idea of what the local scene is without you having to do a ton of extra work and go out and report this information yourself. So those are kind of the 3 basic use cases. Here's what a data distribution looks like. This is something we did a couple of months ago. We had a lot of interest this year. We understand generally what people want. We love to hear requests. So one of the requests we had gotten was for more opioid data. Everyone is dealing, or a lot of places are dealing with the opioid epidemic. What we heard from a lot of customers was that they would love some county-level opioid data, which is very hard to come by. So when one of our health reporters got this data set from the CDC, which was every county's opioid prescription rate in the country, he was like, we should do something with this. So we ran with it. We checked a lot of what the CDC's work was. I kind of got to understand what their methodology was. And then we pulled together, and what we have here is, this is basically like the landing page when you get that email saying, hey, the AP has put up information or data about opioids. This is kind of what it looks like. And if you expand that overview section, we give you all of this information, which sometimes goes as far as like the nut graph of your story. Basically, like, here's the national perspective. Here's why this is important. Here's kind of some of the findings. Here are links to the CDC's reports on this topic. Here's, all sorts of links on kind of what basically the CDC put out a map with this information, but didn't give the underlying data out on their website. So we got the underlying data, so you could do your own thing. So we link to the map, we link to some research that has been done on this, and then also kind of give people caveats as to okay, this is where this data came from. It came from a private organization that tracks prescriptions. So this is basically pretty much every prescription from every pharmacy in your county. And it's been standardized to morphine milligram equivalents, which is a basic dosage equivalent. Basically, if you get more than 30 MMEs a day, it's a little sketchy. If you're over 50, it's really sketchy. And so then we tell you how to use the data, the caveats with the data, and then link to, here's all the AP stories we've done about this topic. So you can kind of see here some of the national coverage. And then, of course, my email at the end. So if you have any questions about how to use this data, and this happens all the time, local reporters can call or email me or another data reporter, and we will check your work. We will go over how you phrase certain sentences. We will answer your questions if you have questions about using the data. So we are here as a resource for local reporters. If you're a one-person shop, if you're the only data analyst in your newsroom and you have no one to double check your analysis, we've done that for people. We are certainly willing to take a little time to say, yeah, don't do that, or you look like you're on the right track, here's another thing you might want to think about. And then there's the data set itself. So everything is in CSVs, it's all been cleaned, it's all been documented above, and if you click on Explore in data.world, what you get is, so for Alaska, there's not data for 2010 for some of these smaller counties, but if you scroll down, you'll see here's the county MME per capita level, and here's kind of the ranking of it, whether there's been a decrease or increase over the last couple of years. And if you went over our overview completely, you would know that if you took that MME and divided it by 30, which is generally the daily dose, you can even come up with how many days a year the people in your county get opioid prescriptions. So if you have a number of 900, that means there enough prescriptions has been written in your county to provide every man, woman, and child in your county every 4 hours opioids for a month. And there are counties in this data set that have numbers that are double or triple that. Well, this is data.world, so you'd have to sign up through. You can't get access to this unless you're an AP member and you sign up for this. We are working to make some of this data available to non-members for a special subscription. We don't have that yet. But basically, if your organization gets the AP wire, you have access to this as long as you sign up.
One kind of quick comment I'll make as well that I really liked about the way that you all are using this in particular is, a lot of times if you're a data journalist and you're going around the web and trying to find interesting data sets, it can be really great to find one that you think you can find a story out of, but it can be so limited if you don't have the context to go along with it. So the ability to ask someone who knows about the data about the methodology, about where it was sourced, seeing like the data dictionary makes your work that much easier, and it's something that can actually stop a story completely if you lack those things. So that's why I think that a lot of this has been successful, is it has all that context living next to the data itself. To kind of illustrate part of that too, if you click on that I on one of the column headers, actually do the one right to the right of it. So you can see, since Megan had some knowledge of this data set, she went in and kind of put in the description of what this column header actually meant. So even if you were coming into this without any familiarity about what MME stood for, you could actually see in the description, what metric this is actually referring to. And then kind of beyond that too, there's kind of basic descriptive statistics around what the data is, like the shape of the data, some of the outliers, things you'd probably be looking for, right off the bat if you were to be exploring this yourself.
So we put this out for members. This was a data set we put out without a webinar, so we did not walk people through it because it's just one spreadsheet, really. But the thing that's amazing about this is a lot of people took this, ran with it immediately on stories. They had never really gotten before an idea of what prescriptions were like in their county. So this is the first time anybody had released really comprehensive data about the situation. So a lot of people did daily, quick hit, turn stories. But this data is still out there for our membership, and now what we're starting to see is people taking this data and crossing it with other data sets to do more complicated projects. So an example of a kind of quick hit story, 538 took our data and did this huge, and if you scroll down, Troy, there's a bunch more maps, did all of this based off our data set and our data distribution. And we talked to the reporter who's working on this, but this is all AP data released through data distribution that's powering all of this. So it turned out this was a fairly quick hit story for them. Yes, they did a lot of interactives and mapping and things like that, but I think they turned this in 3 days, because the data was clean, it was well documented, they could understand it quickly, they could just turn it around.
And kind of coming up on that as well, I often think about the life cycle of a story and kind of how much longevity something can have. And I think having a data set like this enables both those quick hits, but also secondary research, secondary analysis, and something that could be actually built on years over years that you're unlikely to get if it's just if you don't have that kind of basis to go off of.
So another, again, we do these about every 2 weeks. We do them on a very wide variety of subjects. We know our membership is interested in health. We know our membership is interested in kind of consumer stories, demographic stories, but we have a very wide range of topics we hit on these. We try to get things that are kind of a lot of data sets off the news. I recently did one maybe a week after Harvey on the flood insurance coverage. How many people in your county have flood insurance? So we released that data set for the whole country by county and by community level. So that was, but this is another one that we did earlier this year. We were looking at the decline in African American home ownership. That's more of an enterprise story that the AP was working on. We wrote a national story around this topic. But in doing the work on this, the research on this story, obviously we had this very rich data set that we then were well, we should share it with members. Other people, this is a huge thing in some communities. Other people should be looking at this too. So our analysis, our demographic expert, Angel Castanis, put up this data set. We hosted a webinar on how to use this data, so she kind of explained things like margin of error and significance, in the difference between years of data. So she walked people through it. Troy, do you mind going back to the overview for a second so we can kind of look at a little bit of what we distributed on this? Troy? Oh, he's talking. Could you go to the overview on this? I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you. And scroll down a little bit. So again, we give people kind of a lot of information on this. There's a couple of data sets, so you've got multiple spreadsheets. And by the way, you can work with these spreadsheets right in data.world. One of the benefits to this platform is it supports SQL queries. There's a function that allows you to filter things and to sort things right away. So if you just wanted to do that one paragraph insert into a story, all you have to do is click on that explore the data set function and sort and see if your county is near the top. That's a quick way to see if there's a story in this data for you. And, we try to get data sets that are going to be applicable to most places, but I mean, we're not going to hit it every time. So in this case, we had MSA level data, Metro level data, and it was applicable, I think, in about 3/4 of the MSAs in the country. There's some MSAs where there just wasn't enough African American population over the 2 years we were comparing to get a really idea of whether the difference was significant or not. So again, you can explore the data. You can export the data. So one of the things too is if you use SQL Server, or if you use R, if you want to convert the CSV to JSON and do some kick-ass interactive with it, all you have to do is hit export and you get a clean CSV. So you can totally work with this data in data.world, but you can also work with it outside data.world. And Troy, if you can go to go back to overview and then click on queries. I wanted to, up top to the right. I want to show folks, so, and you click on the queries that we've already written. Yeah. It's over to the left under other files, African American.
If you go down a little bit.
I'm sorry, down a little bit, down to queries, excuse me. So sometimes we will write SQL queries for you because we kind of know how people will want to group and look at this information. And then all you have to do, if you scroll down on the SQL query, Troy, is literally not the results, the query itself, is type in what your MSA is, and it will come up with that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Real quick, so can we possibly change the query ourselves?
Yes, you can change the query yourself.
Native American.
Exactly, yes. You can completely change, you can write your own queries in data.world, completely blank, start from scratch, or you can change our queries, either one.
I think the power of kind of having these pre-written ones too that the AP puts out is that, coming from someone, I work with a decent amount of SQL now, but I came from a non-technical background, and even if I didn't know wasn't writing SQL all day, I still can figure out how to change a few different parameters. And I think that's true for everyone, kind of regardless of their background, is the ability to come in and change a few variables. You can do that very easily without knowing the entire language.
Great. So basically, we're writing some of this hard stuff for you, or at least giving you a roadmap of how to do it. And then if you hit questions, hit us up. I can walk you through exactly the SQL query you're trying to write if you hit roadblocks. So that's something I wanted to show folks. I also wanted to show, Troy, if you don't mind going back to the overview. Sorry, go ahead. We had another question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we have SQL in the platform itself, but our whole philosophy is that for the analytics, you probably have tools you already like and prefer, like R or Python. So basically every data set and the result of every query is openable as a data frame in R and Python.
If you go down to open the overview, Troy, I'm sorry. Sorry, we're driving from the back here. So we have our usual, here's the caveats, here's the information, but we also, for this one, have teamed with Microsoft and Power BI to do custom graphics that our members can localize and insert into their stories. So this was a graphic we did for this story. The embed code is right underneath it, so you can grab the embed code and embed that graphic directly into your story. We've worked on some that you can actually customize the graphic just so it's for your area. If you wanted to do a lookup or really hone in on just your county or just your state, you can do that with some of these and modify them. And again, this is stuff we walk people through in the webinar, so we teach you how to do it, and then you've got content. So, I mean, our whole model is trying to get you almost out of the box stories. In some of these data distributions, we have had not many, but a couple. We've actually brought in experts on the topic to speak on the record during the webinars. So we will even bring you experts so you have that national voice and you can ask them questions and they will be they're totally on the record. We did that for the ACA enrollment period last year. We had some ACA data where we had the number of insurers being by county, and we brought in someone from Avalier who had worked with us on the data itself, and Avalier is one of a healthcare consulting firm that handles this stuff and deals with it regularly, and she answered reporters' questions on the record for your story. So we're trying to get you, for these stories, everyone is doing some of these stories. We're all doing demographic stories. We're all doing ACA stories. There's no reason that your local newsroom should have to go to the work of doing some of this stuff yourselves. We can take on that stuff so you can look into your city council and start really investigating your state government, because that's the heart of local journalism. We're trying to make more time for you to do that and take some of this big picture national stuff off your plate. After the hurricanes, everyone was wondering about flood insurance. Everyone was wondering about flooding. Here's the flood insurance data. We've cleaned it up. We've joined it with other data sets. You know it's from us. We've spent a lot of time working on it. Nothing at AP goes out without 2 data analysts working on it, so we fact check all of our own work. We are running it by experts a lot of these times. We're trying to get trustworthy, cleaned up stuff that you can use quickly out to you, so you can spend your time doing the stuff that we can't do, because we're never going to get in to look at your city council.
And one aspect of that I really appreciate as well is this fact that you have experts working on it, is that one thing we think a lot about at data.world is how basically having your data out there and having your methodology out there increases trust in journalism, just kind of writ large. And when you have people asking you, where did you get this stat in your story, being able to point to not only the data set, but also all the people that went into curating it and cleaning it, really actually goes a long way. We've interviewed a lot of people and kind of gotten their thoughts on it, and across the ideological spectrum, having that included with your story is a significant factor in how people receive it and kind of conceive of it.
So for this story, here's a story the Kansas City Star did off of our data. For them, this story was strong enough, the data was strong enough, they had a really good narrative thread on this one. So they just took our data, ran with it, did their whole, went out, reported the story, wrote their whole thing under a couple of reporters' bylines, and then used our data to drive the story idea, but also to do charts. They actually took other data that their data reporter had locally and mashed it up. So they also had foreclosure rates, for instance, which we didn't distribute, but they had it already in-house, and they were like, you know what, this really meshes with the narrative of what you're showing for home ownership. So they brought that in as well. So they kind of took our data, did a little extra work, and had this really strong Sunday package. And Kelsey Ryan, who's the reporter on this, I think turned it in a week. So oftentimes with these data sets, we give you a 2-week window where we embargo the data, and you have 2 weeks to work with it before the AP national story comes out. So you have a lot of prep time. That's the time where we're working with reporters, we're having the webinar, things like that. Sometimes for the ACA stuff, that was on deadline, so we did it and we just were run with it. You have a day, go. But a lot of times we do this stuff under embargo. So for African American homeownership, reporters had 2 weeks to work on this data story, so Kelsey turned this within the 2-week period. But the beauty of it is that then the data is hanging out here, so Minneapolis actually did this story, and they did it a month and a half after our data release with our data, because it's still a good story. So it's not like you have to, if you're busy with something else, it's not like you have to drop things and do the AP story. These things stick around, and you always have access to this data. Once we publish it, once you're a member of data.world, you're good to go forever. So you can always return back to some of these things for ideas and for stories. If you've got a low spot, you're like, what can I do in a couple days? Maybe this is a story you can do in a couple days.
Yeah, and on the same kind of theme of the evergreen data sets, one thing that I've seen some journalists start to do is connect live data sources to something like this and have SQL queries that are consistently slicing the data in interesting ways, but where they can actually revisit it, month over month and just see, have there been any trends that have emerged since I maybe first wrote this story, or that I didn't consider the first time that are now coming forth in the data.
And we do that, actually, AP has done that a couple times with 50 state looks, where we have state house reporters who go out, get information from their state about how their state is handling a breaking news type thing. I'm trying to think what our recent example was. One of the recent examples were how whether the states had been breached for election, whether they had been notified about the election, whether their data had been breached for elections. Our reporters are all out there collecting this information, typing it into a spreadsheet. That spreadsheet is linked directly to data.world, and it's publishable and updated. So that's just kind of a resource that our members can continue to hit to see what kind of the latest status is. I'm sorry, you had a question?
Yeah, would you consider it part of your remit to, when you're working with a local paper like this, you have to say, well, the African American home ownership rules, they look at it very interesting, but there is also some data that shows that there's a link between high rates of home ownership and also unemployment rates, just to put a different spin on the story. Is that part of what you guys at AP do?
I mean, we wouldn't necessarily do all that work for you, but I would explain to you what would be a good idea and a bad idea around that. We definitely, I just worked with a reporter a couple of weeks ago from a large East Coast paper about a project that he's working on now, and he was like, I'm thinking of taking this data set that you released and mashing it up with this, this, and this. What would be the kind of pitfalls of doing that? So we kind of talked through his idea a little bit, and I think he has a better plan now of going forward. But yeah, yes.
And kind of expand on that as well. So a big part of our platform is the open data side as well. If you're doing a story and there's another data set you have access to, as long as there's a place where they can be joined, you can do so yourself and make some new analysis. One thing we're going to be working on releasing more in the future, which really excites me, is our whole backend is what's called a graph database. And so basically as more data sets get added, we're going to start basically surfacing more of the linkages between them. So basically even start recommending data sets that maybe have some interesting correlations you may want to check out yourself. Mm-hmm.
That is a good question. Could we switch to Word for a second? So if you are a data.world member already, if you have signed up for data.world, but you are not an AP member on data.world, what you need to do is email this address with data distribution sign up and provide us your data.world username. Also, where you work and your email address, your work email address. We will not link anyone to their Gmail address, so please don't send that to us. If you're not a data.world member, it's probably the easier way to do it, is just email this address with data distribution sign up, and again, give us your work email address, where you work, and just say, hey, we want to get in on data.world. And what will happen is we will then send you an invite to join data.world. Once you do that and sign up, there is a red dot this is the only hard thing. There's a red dot in the upper right-hand corner on a little bell that says you have a notification, and you have to click there and accept our invitation. And once you do that, you have access then to all of Associated Press data sets. You get an email immediately anytime we publish a new data set. And because you've given us your work email address, we will be sending out larger AP emails notifications that will tell you when the webinar is, all that kind of stuff. And what our plan is for our stories. So there's two emails. You get an email from data.world, but you also get an email from AP saying, hey, the AP is working on this national story. It's around X subject, like flood insurance. If we're going to host a webinar on it to explain this data tomorrow at noon. And we record all our webinars, and then we post them on data.world, so you can always go back. If you're interested in an old data set and we did a webinar about it, you can watch that right now and move forward with that. One thing we're going to do in the future, I think, is like update some of these data sets. So like that opioid data set that the CDC released in July, that's something that we're going to kind of keep on top of. They are acquiring that data for 2016, so we're going to be continually updating that. There is no cost as long as your news organization is already an AP member. If your news organization is not an AP member, unfortunately, this is not available to you right now, but do email us anyway, because we are interested in knowing how many non-members are curious. When we released the opioid data set, we had a lot of interest. And our sales team is now working on a way to get people just data memberships. So you could sign up for like so many data releases a year or something like that, even if you're not a WIRE member. So tell us you're interested no matter what. But yeah, if you're a news organization gets the wires, you're good to go. And you'll be signed up pretty much immediately. If you're AP members already, just say data. It's again datateam@ape.org. All those emails, like, yeah, don't burden the customer service team, please, because like we'll just handle it ourselves and we can do it all in like 4 seconds. They'll just forward your email to us, so it's fine.
One thing I wanted to comment on too, because as you were talking earlier, one thing that kind of jumped out at me was this idea of like the webinars, but also like asking questions, and it kind of ties back to a theme that I consider to be really important, and I hope you all do too, which is that data is inherently a social object and really shouldn't live in isolation. And the ability to ask questions about that data and kind of like socialize it is, I think, actually really important to the strength of the data set itself and how you can use it. One thing, if you actually go to, if you go back to the African American homeownership data set and go up to the top and hit discussion, one aspect, I think that conversations about data at all are important, but one aspect that really strikes me as being a strength of doing on data.world or in kind of any platform where it's next to the data is this ability to actually see what other people are asking about it, right? If you like scroll to the bottom, there was someone asking why a certain percentage was calculated in a certain way or displayed in a certain way. And if there's like a bunch of different people from different organizations accessing the same data, chances are they're going to have the same questions. So being able to kind of jump off of that and not have to repeat those same questions and benefit from their knowledge already is, I think, a really strong and important thing that should always be part of data work.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't think the discussion forum would be at all something that I thought everyone was going to be like super competitive and like kind of be quiet about it. And the discussion forums have actually been some of the most interesting things. People have been sharing their work, showing off final projects. A lot of times when folks publish, they'll send us a link and show off everyone, and then everyone talks about how good it is or how like they could have changed something or done something differently. And a lot of people have gotten ideas from projects that other places have done and kind of jumped off that. So we've kind of built a pretty robust community. I think we have about 250 different news organizations through data.world right now. Like Troy said, we used to have this legacy distribution system that all AP customers already get these emails actually. But the problem is it goes to one person in your news organization, and that one person might not do anything with data or might not be reading these emails, and then they delete the email, and you never find, the person who is like a graphics person or a data person who might be interested, never even hears that this is happening. With data.world, anyone in your newsroom can sign up. So if you deal with graphics all the time, if you're doing interactives, you can sign up and just see what kind of interactives the AP is releasing around these subjects, and also like data that you might be able to use for your own interactives. If you're an education reporter, you can get these, all of these data releases and see if any of them fit your beat. So, yeah, it's been very useful that way. Troy, I think we were going to show off so this is another data. This is the flood insurance one that we did just a couple weeks ago. And then this is an example of an interactive that the AP did actually around that data set that we included the embed code for in the distribution. So like here's like a hand-built thing. Someone in our, Maureen Linke, who is an AP graphics artist, did this interactive, you get the embed code with the data so you can use it. And it's a searchable thing, so you just put your county name in and you can find out all the information about your county's flood insurance. But we've had a couple of, I wanted to show NewJersey.com, Troy, if you don't mind, then we can have lots of questions and conversation, because we also want to hear from you about what kind of national data sets you would like us to surface for you, and kind of how we can do this better. So we did something earlier this year about the spring housing market. The stock of houses for sale across the US had dropped precipitously. It was the lowest point in 20 years. In some markets, it created this huge crunch as to whether you could find a home to buy. So we had that data, we had it by zip code, which is super granular. And then we also had it by county. And it was from 2 different sources. We kind of cleaned it up, put it together, allowed people to see what the drop had looked like year over year, and then what the drop had looked like in specific markets. So whether you were trying to buy a starter home, trying to buy a upper level home, luxury home, or why you're trying to buy a middle second home. And then this is how New Jersey, one of our members, NewJersey.com, took this data. They actually did 3 different interactives about it, the hot places to move to in New Jersey, where it was good to be, where places were having trouble selling their houses. And then they allowed you to check by zip code, weigh, if you were looking in the market, which was a buyer's market and which was a seller's market, and how many active listings there were year over year. So this is an example. They did this interactive, but it's literally in every county you can look at specific zip codes and see how, whether active listings were up or down, whether you would have trouble buying a house there or whether you'd have trouble selling your house there, perhaps. So just an example of how people have used our data. One thing that's interesting about NewJersey.com is they've taken this and run with it, and they've actually created their own data.world portal. So they are now showing their work and sharing all of their data with their readers, and everything they publish now, they put up on data.world. So you can double check their work, and if you're an interested reader, you can go and look at their raw data.
Yeah, absolutely. And Troy, if you're looking for it, it's actually, they spell out the dot, so it's nj.com. But yeah, it was actually really incredible to see how they ran with this. So, as I mentioned earlier, a big part of what we do is around kind of the open data side of things. And they decided that, as part of who they wanted to be as a data journalism team, that having some of their data behind their work as open and kind of accessible was really central to them. So they have now, a lot of different data sets behind their articles where if their readership wants to go and kind of understand how they got to that conclusion or dig into the data themselves, they can now do so. So they've done this with a lot of different good data sets, especially around the opioid crisis in New Jersey, that I think really strengthens the kind of the overall work itself. So it's really incredible stuff they're doing.
So basically, when they do a data-driven story, they link out to the raw data that they put up on data.world, and then actually, what they've gotten now is they've created this, New Jersey, nerd group of people who, go in and check the raw data and then discuss it on data.world. So they've kind of created this other social platform for their readership to talk about their stories.
And I know, too, at some point we'd love to have Troy come back up ahead of the Q&A.
Yeah, we like to leave a lot of time open for questions and discussion about this because, again, it doesn't help if we distribute data sets that no one uses. So what we're trying to do is get a good sense of what people are looking for, what folks would like to see from AP, and how we could fine-tune this process to better serve our membership.
Mm-hmm. And kind of in a similar vein too, as well. So as I mentioned, a lot of what we do is around open data, and there are certain partnerships that we pursue with really canonical and referential data sets. So one of our earliest things was the U.S. Treasury Department. And so we're always, or U.S. Treasury, but also the U.S. Census, and had a linked data representation of the American Community Survey data. So one thing we're always looking for as well is feedback around what are really referential data sets that people would want to see in an open capacity also.
And 2 things, I'm sitting back there dying not to be able to open my mouth. It's crazy. So 2 things I wanted to point out. One is, for the folks who aren't AP members, and someone was talking to me about saying there are a lot of nonprofit newsrooms who are doing local stuff. Well, we're really interested in figuring out what kind of collaborations and partnerships we can do with other, especially nonprofit news organizations in general. We want to figure out what that looks like. We did a project with the USA Today Network that on gun violence that Megan worked on. I did. No worries. So we did a partnership with them around gun violence. We did some really good stories, and we're looking at other ways, talking with some other nonprofit networks, and trying to just figure out how we can help bring more data journalism to smaller newsrooms in general, those who are traditional AP members, and maybe some who aren't, if we find out the right way to do it. So let's talk about that. Shoot us an email. Second thing is, I think most of our work so far, our conversation has been kind of one way. We said, hey, we got this great data set, take it, do what you want with it. And then you're like, okay, how, can I do this or do this? Can I get help? But we haven't had a lot of ideas coming the other way. Folks saying, hey, I'm struggling with this data set, but it might be interesting to lots of other AP members if we can figure out how to make it work. If you can help make it work, then we can distribute to everyone. You get your story, and everyone else gets an opportunity to do that story too. Or, hey, I'm really interested in this topic, and it seems like something that could be interesting for other news organizations. Would you all be doing a data distribution around that? So getting those kinds of ideas from AP members, I think, is going to be really essential in figuring out how to really benefit from the full network aspect of what we're doing on Data.World and what we're trying to do with this program.
I guess with that, we'll get open up for questions. But I know we had a few earlier, but anybody else have anything? Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm sorry, could
Oh,
you go to
yeah.
the mic, because this is being taped, so they need to hear you.
Good call.
Thank you.
I noticed when I was looking at the website just now on my phone, there were some data sets from other people other than the AP. How verified are those, and how cleaned up? Are they just random people putting them up, or how much should we trust those?
That's a really good question. So we kind of look at it from two different angles, kind of like a top-down and a bottoms-up approach. So there are a handful of organizations that, like the census, like the AP, where they're like verified accounts, and you can kind of trust from that social signal that they are who they say they are, and the data has been vetted and coming from legitimate sources. We do have a lot of people in the open data community who are uploading their own data. And from that perspective, we want to empower people to upload what they want, but then the onus does kind of fall upon the data consumer to both look at their sources, but then also use some of the social aspects of the platform and look at what other projects they've worked on, what kind of groups they're working with, and kind of almost like in the same way as Twitter or Wikipedia have verification methods. We encourage you to kind of look for yourself and see if it's something you want to use. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Keep on forgetting to go to the microphone.
Yeah. What plans do you have to globalize? For some of us, we're just as interested in data from around the world, mm-hmm. which is far more scarce than US data. Thanks.
Yeah, for AP, we've done a few data-driven international stories, and that's a real growth area for us. We want to do more. We're a global news organization, and we have folks who are working on investigations internationally, and so we expect to do more of those. Yeah, we haven't done enough yet, but we need to do more.
Yeah, and speaking from the open data side of things, we do have some groups like the Humanitarian Data Exchange, IATI, that we've brought in data from on a consistent basis. There is kind of a larger question of a lot of countries want to get involved in open data, but especially for developing countries, I think the first step is proper data collection methods, and there's a lot of steps that countries need to take before getting to the open data side. So I think that's part of the reason for scarcity for certain data in other parts around the world. But your question is a good one, and we want to absolutely have it be at a global scale, not just be US-centric.
I think sometimes when it comes to data, it's just jumping in and trying to figure out everything and stuff. Is there maybe it already exists on Data World, but are there best practices, like maybe a series of articles or videos or something that kind of says maybe you should try these little bite-sized things so that you can slowly wade into it instead of jumping off the deep end and drowning in numbers?
Okay, so two things. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to pitch the fact that we actually wrote a whole chapter on data journalism in the AP style book this year for the first time. So that is a great place to start with like general best practices of how to use data, how to collect it, and kind of how to visualize it a little bit. We're working on expanding those chapters. The second thing is, honestly, for some of these data sets, because we've done a lot of work already, it's really as easy for some of these projects as like filtering and sorting. So if you are interested in data journalism, maybe haven't done a lot of data journalism, and we put out one of these things, and you can sit in on a webinar, and we will walk you through, okay, here's where to get this number, and here's what this number means. Here is how to find this number and where your county ranks among the counties in your state. It's a really good early way to kind of see, if this is something you are interested in. Beyond that, there's a whole bunch of resources, through IRE.
I like the News Nerdery Slack. Do you know
Yeah.
about the News Nerdery Slack? That's one to check out. You can get a lot of help there. There's also the Data Journalism Handbook, which is available online and is kind of a collaborative work. Lots of folks pitched in on that and wrote pieces on it. A lot of folks doing data journalism came up with NICAR, being members of NICAR and being on the NICAR L listserv, and they've certainly taught me an awful lot along the way. So there are a lot of resources out there, and those are a few that'll get you started. And then they will link you to other resources.
Yeah.
And a few which are, I guess, a little bit more.
What's the name of the Slack again?
News Nerdery. It's one word. News Nerdery. Nerdery.
And if your question was also kind of around just data science in general, there's obviously a lot of free resources around online, but there are several also on data.world around data wrangling, linear regression. One collaborative project that I like called Steal the SQL. And it's basically people putting their own SQL queries up where you can copy them, manipulate them, and kind of use them for inspiration. So I'd recommend checking those out as well.
You need
Yeah,
to
if you would
talk
mind.
about, sorry.
Yeah,
Microphone.
microphone would be great.
I just had a partial knee replacement, so.
Oh,
Oh.
Sorry.
I could have brought that to you.
It's all right, this is an easy question. So you're looking for feedback from AP members, but how granular or flexible can you make requests of your? It's like, okay, this is something we want to do. I mean, that's a tall order, but
Yeah. I think that I really want to, right now, we don't have an easy channel for that, but we do have that data team email address, and you can shoot us an email there. I think the question is always going to be for us, I would love to get more ideas from members saying, hey, we want to do work with this, or this data set's really hard to work with, we've been trying to do it. And we're going to ask the question, is this something that's going to be useful for the rest of our membership? And if it is, why not? If it's something we want to do, we think it's going to be a good story, it's going to be useful for everyone else, I would love to see those opportunities where we help you solve a problem and in the process, create a resource for everyone else.
yeah. Well,
be in a discussion board. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing.
Are there other markets that are interested in bankruptcies or something?
We've been talking with some folks at Data.World who've been talking about exactly that kind of thing. And James can tell you more about kind of what they're looking at, where they're thinking. The discussions that we've had have been around how can, for our AP members, we want to get first crack at helping them. And then if we can't help, then maybe the rest of the Data.World community can help.
Yeah, and sorry, I didn't catch the end of your question there, but it was around.
It's like making a request.
Oh yeah, making a request. Yeah, I think that the broader side of like, I would like this certain type of data is something that we have thought about a lot internally because we do, encourage people to reach out to us. We don't have like a button on the site though that says like data I'd like to see, but I think it's a really interesting idea, and it'd be. We do have a team that does source open data, so that would be the kind of feedback we would help prioritize something like that.
I would love that kind of discussion on like our general membership site.
Yeah.
That would be very cool. We kind of did a similar presentation at IRE though in June, and we did get a couple of requests from reporters who are like, "Can we do this?" And I will say we've actually made good on one of those requests already. And we have another more general request in the works. So some more kind of consumer finance, consumer type of reporting and data. And so we've got one kind of in the pipeline that's about consumer complaints in a certain field. So, so yeah, we are listening. Like, you know, when people have good ideas, we would love to run with them, especially if we can see, yeah, there would definitely be some, you know, larger, broader interest in this.
Yeah, that's a key part as well. We do have people who are just like, hey, I'm doing this project, please give me a data set. We're like, well, we can't. That's not
Yes,
what we do.
as much as I would love to do all of your data work for all of your newsrooms, like, probably not going to happen.
Odie coming up.
Yeah.
So, two apologies, this might be redundant or non-representative, but I live upstream of you guys at a think tank. So what are the attributes of a data set we would create that you would want? I mean,
That
speaking-
is a great question. Because we'd actually like to do a little bit more, I think, with especially neutral party think tanks. We did partner last year with Avalier, which again is a healthcare consultancy, to do some of the ACA work just because they were already doing some of it. And so we fine-tuned what they wanted to do and worked with them to create a data set that we thought would work for our members around open enrollment. I mean, generally, obviously, we are interested in kind of neutral party research. We're not interested in groups that have a strong advocacy position, you know, and beyond that, like, definitely completeness of the data, uniqueness of the data. You know, we routinely get pitches from groups that are like, we have this data set. It's like, that's census data. Come on, dudes. Like, we're on that one already. We got it. But, you know, something unique, certainly topics that are in the news and, you know, are creating a lot of buzz at the moment, and that can help explain a problem or explain a situation that maybe we haven't seen before. I mean, that was one of the things when the CDC put out this opioid data set, we were like, oh yeah, that's what everyone's kind of been waiting for, is to see how many opioids get prescribed in your communities. And like, no one had ever looked at that and gotten that data out on a county level before. So something like that we would jump on.
And the county level is a good point too. The granularity is
Yes.
really going to be helpful. So if it has to be below state level, we want something, you know, as granular as possible.
Yeah, most of our data releases, like, we've done state level ones, not very often. A lot of times we'll give you state level aggregates along with the county level stuff, so you can see what the situation is in your state and how your state ranks against all the 50 states. And then also you get the more granular stuff, the county level, the MSA, that kind of thing.
And I would encourage you as well, one thing we've started to see a little bit more of is people who are like basically offering like data as a service through our platform. So what they'll do is they'll have maybe an open data set with a sample of kind of like what their data actually looks like. And then, you know, if someone decides they want to purchase that data, they'll handle the transaction elsewhere and then basically give them access to that private data on data.world.
Hey, I'm wondering if you guys have space for sort of collaborative projects where, like, for example, we did a project last year looking at substitute teacher rates, and there's no central warehouse that collects that, so we had a FOIA from individual school districts. There's like 50,000 in the United States, so we had to pick a sample of a few hundred, but I would love to see, you know, people in from every media market, like if they could just FOIA, you know, here are the things that we want to find out, and plug it into a spreadsheet that then everybody could participate in and then actually use to create like the first national data set of something that's not currently being collected.
Yeah, I would absolutely love seeing things like that. We've got, it's interesting, I think on a broader perspective too, if you look at like one of the main strengths of like GitHub and the open software movement is you've had these really powerful pieces of software that people have been able to use and leverage. And I don't think we've seen a ton of that yet in the open data space, but I think it's high time. There are a few groups doing things like that in data.world. You know, I imagine probably the Associated Press, there may be groups that will do something like that within your org as well.
We've done private projects like
Yeah.
that. We did one recently with USA Today and the USA Today Network. We're working on a second one now with the Center for Public Integrity around certain subjects, but like with many reporters out in the field going in and entering data. So we've done a little bit of that. We'd love to do more.
Yeah, and there's kind of for like inspirational purposes as well. There's a really cool group called Data for Democracy on data.world. It's, you know, a little over 1,000 like civic hackers and data enthusiasts, and they work on open projects around with public data for kind of similar civic means.
Anything else? Again, to sign up, datateam@ap.org. Just shoot us your information. If you are not personally interested, please go back to your newsrooms and tell people who might be, because we understand that this is something that could kind of hits a lot of different groups of people within a newsroom. It might be your producers, it might be some online interactives type people, so it might be some reporters. So please go back and share this info. We would love to see you on data.world.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.